Dr. Zexhai pressed her crystal fingers against the scanner display, watching the readings with growing excitement. The ancient ruins beneath Kepler Station's surface were older than anything the galaxy had ever discovered. Much older. "Commander Veltar, you need to see this," she called to the station's military leader, a tall blue-skinned ethereal who floated rather than walked. "These structures predate the oldest known civilization by at least 50,000 years. The research station orbited a dead world on the edge of known space, far from the busy trade routes of the Galactic Confederation. 7 different alien species worked together here, united in their love of discovery. The Confederation had been at peace for over 2 centuries, and places like Kepler Station showed what could be accomplished when different species worked together." Veltar drifted over to examine the readings. His large black eyes reflected the scanner's blue glow. "Are you certain of this dating, Doctor?" "The isotope decay is clear," Zexhai replied, her crystalline body chiming softly as she moved. "Whatever civilization built this was ancient when our species were still learning to use fire." Around them, the mixed crew of scientists continued their work. A 6-legged insect-like hive drone operated the deep excavation equipment, while a furry warm-blood researcher analyzed atmospheric samples. Everyone was excited about the discovery. "The energy readings are strange too," added Dr. Kethnos, a gelatinous flowing who could change shape at will. Currently, he looked like a tall, thin version of the others. "There are power sources down there that are still active after all this time. That should have been their first warning. The excavation took 3 days. Each layer they peeled back revealed technology beyond their understanding. The materials didn't match anything in their databases. The architecture followed no known patterns. Most disturbing of all, everything looked like it had been built for war. These aren't homes or temples," Zexhai noted as they studied the images from the deepest probes. "These are fortifications, weapons platforms. This entire complex was designed for battle." "Battle against what?" Veltar wondered aloud. They found out soon enough. The activation was accidental. Dr. Kethnos was analyzing what looked like a control panel when his gelatinous form touched several surfaces at once. There was a brief flash of light, then silence. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the ground began to shake. "Seismic activity," reported the hive drone, its multiple eyes fixed on the monitoring equipment. "Massive movements beneath the surface. But it wasn't an earthquake." Through the station's windows, they watched in horror as the dead planet's surface split open. Huge metal structures rose from hidden underground bays, their surfaces gleaming despite thousands of years in darkness. "Ships," Veltar whispered. "Those are warships." The vessels were massive, each one larger than Kepler Station itself. Their design was angular and brutal, covered in weapon ports that were already beginning to glow with deadly energy. As the crew watched in frozen terror, dozens of these ancient ships emerged from their hiding places. "Get me a connection to Confederation Command," Veltar ordered, finally breaking from his shock. "Emergency frequency." But before they could transmit, the ancient ships opened fire. The first blast turned the research outpost on the planet's surface into vapor. The second destroyed the orbital mining platform that had been operating nearby. The third hit Kepler Station's shields, which failed instantly. "Impossible," gasped the station's warm-blood engineer. "Our shields should have held against anything." More ancient ships were rising from the planet, hundreds of them. They moved with perfect coordination like parts of a single mind. Their weapons adapted with each shot, becoming more effective against the station's defenses. "Mayday! Mayday!" Veltar spoke into the communication system. "This is Commander Veltar of Kepler Station. We are under attack by unknown vessels. Repeat, we are under attack." The response came from Admiral Kethmore at Confederation Defense Command. His ethereal voice was calm but concerned. "Commander, what is the nature of this attack? We show no authorized military operations in your sector." "The ships aren't ours," Veltar replied as another blast shook the station. "They're ancient, thousands of years old. They came out of the planet itself." There was silence on the channel. Then, "Commander, that's impossible. No technology could survive that long while maintaining function. Another ancient ship rose from the planet, this one even larger than the others. It was clearly a command vessel, bristling with more weapons than some entire fleets. As they watched, it began to scan the surrounding space with beams of energy that made their instruments scream warnings. It's mapping the area, Dr. Zexhai realized. Learning about our technology, our positions, everything. The attack resumed with terrible efficiency. The ancient ships had somehow analyzed their defenses and found every weakness. Energy weapons that should have been impossible to stop were cutting through the station's hull like it was paper. All hands prepare for evacuation, Veltar announced over the station's speakers. This is not a drill. But even as the crew rushed to the escape pods, they could see it was too late. The ancient ships were everywhere, their formations spreading, out to catch any fleeing vessels. Worse, more ships were emerging from the planet every minute. Commander, Dr. Zexhai called from her station. I'm detecting similar activations throughout this star system. Whatever we triggered, it wasn't just here. There are ancient facilities on 12 different worlds, all coming online. The scope of the disaster was becoming clear. This wasn't just one hidden base. It was an entire fleet that had been sleeping beneath dead worlds, waiting for someone to accidentally wake it up. Sir, the Hive drone reported, long-range sensors show the ancient vessels are moving toward inhabited systems. They're not just defending this location, they're advancing. Veltar understood immediately. Whatever these ancient machines were, they weren't content to simply destroy intruders. They were preparing for a wider war. Get me an open channel, he ordered. All frequencies, maximum power. Sir, that will drain our remaining power, the engineer warned. Do it. The communication array flared to life, sending their message across the galaxy on every frequency the Confederation used. Veltar's voice was steady, despite the chaos around him. To any who receive this transmission, he began, this is Commander Veltar of Kepler Station. We have awakened something ancient and terrible. We discovered ruins on Kepler 7 and accidentally activated a defense system. Hundreds of ancient warships have emerged and are spreading throughout the galaxy. The station shook again. Through the windows, they could see the ancient command ship turning toward them, all its weapons charging. Our weapons are useless, Veltar continued. Our shields fail. These ships adapt to everything we throw at them. They're heading for inhabited systems now. If there is anyone out there with the power to stop what we have unleashed, please. The transmission was cut off as the ancient ship's main weapon struck Kepler Station. The blast tore through what remained of their hull, venting atmosphere and crew into space. But the message had been sent. Across the galaxy, on hundreds of worlds belonging to 7 different species, communication officers received the desperate call for help. The coordinates of Kepler Station were included in the transmission, along with all the data they had gathered about the ancient ships. Within hours, the Confederation's fastest ships were racing toward the crisis. But they would arrive too late. The ancient machines, now fully awakened after their long sleep, began their systematic advance toward inhabited space. The galaxy's long peace was over. Something old and angry had been awakened, and it remembered only war. Admiral Kethmore floated in the command center of the Confederation Defense Station, watching the tactical display with growing dread. 3 days had passed since Kepler Station's final transmission, and the situation was worse than anyone had imagined. The ancient ships have destroyed 7 star systems, reported Captain Zilnara, a 4-armed collective member whose species shared thoughts through biological networks. They adapt to our weapons faster than we can develop new ones. Every defense we create, they counter within hours. The ancient machines had been dubbed harbingers by the terrified populations of the galaxy. They moved with mechanical precision, consuming everything in their path. Worse, they were multiplying. Every system they conquered seemed to contain more hidden facilities, producing fresh ships to join their growing fleet. Our combined forces engaged them at the Taller system, Kethmore said, reviewing the battle reports. 60 ships from all 7 Confederation species. We lost 58 ships and destroyed exactly 0 enemy vessels. The surviving crews told stories that chilled the ethereal admiral. The harbingers didn't just fight back, they learned. Energy weapons that worked in the first minutes of battle became useless as the enemy ships adapted their shields. Tactics that succeeded once never worked again. "Sir," called a young warm-blood officer, "we're receiving reports of unknown ships approaching the dead zone around Kepler Station." Kethmore turned his large black eyes toward the sensor display. "Ours?" "No, sir. The signatures don't match any Confederation species. The ships appear to be primitive." On the main screen, grainy images showed vessels that looked nothing like the elegant designs preferred by civilized species. Where Confederation ships were sleek curves of energy and advanced alloys, these newcomers appeared to be crude boxes of metal held together by external structures and primitive thruster arrays. "They're massive, though," the sensor officer continued. "Some of them are larger than our dreadnoughts, but they seem to be built from basic materials: steel alloys, chemical propulsion systems, electromagnetic weapons." Captain Zilnara shared a confused thought pulse with her fellow collective members throughout the fleet. Who still uses such primitive technology? No known species has built ships like that for thousands of years. "Could they be refugees?" suggested another officer. "Survivors from some unknown colony using whatever materials they could find?" Kethmore studied the readings. The ships were indeed crude by Confederation standards, but there were so many of them, hundreds of vessels of various sizes, all heading directly toward the area where the harbingers had made their stronghold. "Try to make contact," he ordered. "Standard diplomatic channels." The response came quickly, but not in any language their computers recognized. The voice was harsh, with strange tonal qualities that suggested the speakers had evolved in a high-gravity environment. "Translation matrix is working," the communications officer reported. "The language is completely unknown, but we're getting basic meaning from context and mathematics." The translated message was brief and unsettling. "We received your distress call. Stay out of our way." "Stay out of their way?" Kethmore repeated. "Do they understand what they're flying toward? The harbingers have destroyed everything we've sent against them." "Sir," the sensor officer called urgently, "the unknown ships are entering harbinger space. They're not requesting safe passage or trying to negotiate. They're going in weapons hot." Every screen in the command center switched to the long-range sensors focused on the dead zone around Kepler Station. The primitive-looking ships had formed into attack formations that seemed chaotic compared to the precise movements of Confederation fleets. Then the shooting started. The strangers' weapons were unlike anything in Confederation databases. Instead of energy beams or plasma bursts, they fired solid projectiles at incredible speeds. Chunks of metal and explosive warheads slammed into harbinger ships with brutal force. "Kinetic weapons," gasped a Hive technician, its multiple eyes fixed on the readings. "They're using mass and velocity as their primary attack method." But what shocked the watching Confederation forces even more was that the weapons were working. Harbinger shields, which had effortlessly deflected the most advanced energy weapons in the galaxy, buckled under the relentless pounding of high-velocity metal. "How is that possible?" Zilnara wondered aloud. "The Harbinger's adaptive systems are designed to counter energy-based attacks," Dr. Yelhai observed from the science station. She was one of Dr. Zexhai's colleagues who had escaped the destruction of Kepler Station. "They analyze energy frequencies, power outputs, and beam characteristics. But these kinetic weapons are just physics. Mass times acceleration. There's nothing to adapt to." The unknown ships fought with a savagery that disturbed the peaceful Confederation observers. When their vessels took damage, instead of withdrawing for repairs, they continued attacking until they were destroyed. Some even accelerated toward Harbinger ships, detonating themselves in massive explosions that took the enemy vessels with them. "They're ramming them," Kethmore said in disbelief. "They're deliberately crashing their ships into the enemy." "Sir, we're picking up audio transmissions from the unknown ships," the communications officer reported. "It sounds like singing." The translation matrix worked overtime to make sense of the alien voices. What came through was disturbing, battle songs filled with references to death and glory, victory at any cost, and something they called honor. One transmission was clearer than the rest. "This is Captain Santos of the Earth vessel Indomitable. All ships prepare for close engagement. Remember why we're here." They called for help and we answered. "Show these machines what happens when they threaten the innocent." "Earth?" Dr. Yelhai looked up from her console. "There's no planet called Earth in our databases." "They're from outside Confederation space," Kethmore realized. "Completely outside. We don't even know they existed." The battle raged for 6 hours. The humans, as they called themselves, lost almost half their fleet, but they achieved something the entire Confederation military had failed to do. They were winning. Harbinger ships that had seemed invincible were being torn apart by weapons that should have been obsolete. The ancient machines' perfect coordination broke down as they tried to adapt to tactics that made no logical sense. "Look at this attack pattern." Silnara pointed to the tactical display. "They're ignoring the optimal firing positions and instead moving to ranges where they can see their targets directly. It's tactically unsound, but it's working," Dr. Yelhai noted. "The Harbinger's targeting systems are designed to predict logical behavior. They can't predict insanity." As they watched, a human ship missing half its hull and venting atmosphere managed to get close enough to a Harbinger mothership to launch a spread of what their sensors identified as primitive nuclear warheads. The explosion lit up space like a small star. "Nuclear weapons," the Hive technician reported with obvious horror. "They're using nuclear weapons as standard armaments. The Confederation had banned such weapons centuries ago as unnecessarily destructive. Every civilized species had moved beyond such crude tools of war. But these humans seem to embrace them." "Sir," the communications officer called, "we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet commander." The voice that came through the speakers was female, speaking in that same harsh language. The translation was clearer now that their computers had more data to work with. "Confederation forces, this is Admiral Rodriguez of the Earth Defense Fleet. We've received your distress call and are responding. We have the situation under control, but we need you to maintain your distance. Our weapons don't distinguish between friend and foe at these ranges." Kethmore activated the reply channel. "Admiral Rodriguez, this is Admiral Kethmore of the Confederation Defense Force. We're grateful for your assistance, but must warn you that these Harbinger vessels are extremely dangerous. They adapt to any attack." There was a pause before the human admiral replied. Her voice carried what sounded like amusement. "Admiral, with respect, we've been fighting for our survival since before we learned to make fire. We know how to handle dangerous." As if to prove her point, another group of human ships executed a maneuver that made no tactical sense. They spread out in a wide formation and began firing simultaneously from multiple angles. The Harbinger ships, trying to adapt to attacks from all directions at once, began experiencing system failures. "Impossible," whispered Dr. Yelhai. "They're overloading the Harbinger's adaptive capabilities with pure chaos." But even as they celebrated this unexpected turn in the war, the Confederation observers began to notice disturbing details about their rescuers. Intercepted human communication spoke casually of acceptable losses and total warfare. These weren't just warriors. They were something else entirely, something that might be even more dangerous than the Harbingers themselves. Captain Maria Santos wiped the blood from her forehead as she surveyed the bridge of the Indomitable. Half her crew was dead, the ship's hull had more holes than solid metal, and the air recycling system was failing. By any reasonable standard, they should retreat. Instead, she ordered another attack. "All remaining ships, this is Santos," she spoke into her comm unit. "We've got them on the run. Press the attack. No mercy." Around the bridge, her surviving crew worked with the desperate efficiency of people who had faced extinction before. They patched holes with metal plates, rerouted power through damaged systems, and continued firing even as their own ship fell apart around them. From a safe distance, the Confederation fleet watched in fascination and horror. "Their tactics make no sense," Admiral Kethmore observed, studying the human battle formations. "They're fighting at ranges where weapons can physically see their targets. It's like they're still using optical targeting systems." Dr. Yelhai reviewed the sensor data from the ongoing battle. Admiral, I think they are using optical targeting. Look at these weapon signatures. They're firing solid projectiles guided by computers, not energy weapons guided by sensors. The implications were disturbing. Every civilized species had moved beyond such primitive methods millennia ago. Energy weapons were precise, clean, and efficient. Physical projectiles were wasteful, destructive, and required massive amounts of raw materials, but they were also completely unpredictable to the Harbinger adaptive systems. Sir, reported Captain Zilnara, I'm analyzing the human ship designs. They appear to be built for damage absorption rather than damage avoidance. Look at these hull thicknesses. Some sections are over 2 meters of solid metal. 2 meters? Kethmore's ethereal form shimmered with disbelief. That's not armor, that's a fortress wall. How do they achieve any reasonable speed with such mass? The answer came from observing their propulsion systems. The humans used what appeared to be controlled explosions to push their massive ships forward. Chemical rockets that should have been obsolete were somehow propelling vessels the size of small cities. But the most disturbing aspect wasn't their technology, it was their behavior. Listen to this. Dr. Yelhai played an intercepted human transmission. The translation was clear enough. Engineering to bridge, we've lost main power and backup power, running on emergency cells only. Bridge to engineering, how long can we maintain weapons? Maybe 10 minutes, Captain? Then we make those 10 minutes count. All hands prepare for ramming speed. The Confederation officers exchanged horrified looks. The human ship in question had just announced its intention to fly directly into an enemy vessel rather than retreat. They're going to sacrifice themselves, whispered a young warm-blood officer. They watched as the damaged human ship accelerated toward a Harbinger mothership, its crew singing something their translators rendered as a death song. The collision tore both vessels apart in a nuclear fireball that could be seen across the star system. Insane, Kethmore muttered. Completely insane. But insanity, it seemed, was exactly what was needed to defeat the Harbingers. Another intercepted. Transmission revealed more about human thinking. This is Rodriguez to all ships. Remember, these machines have been sleeping for 50,000 years. They've never faced anything like us. Use that advantage. Commander Chen reporting. My ship is combat ineffective, but we still have functioning nuclear warheads. Understood. Chen, make them count. The conversation ended with Commander Chen's ship detonating itself inside a Harbinger formation, taking 6 enemy vessels with it. Dr. Yelhai shuddered as she analyzed the data. Admiral, they're not just fighting to win. They're fighting to ensure these Harbingers can never threaten anyone again. Look at this. She displayed tactical information showing human ships systematically destroying every Harbinger facility they could find, even ones that weren't actively threatening them. They're committing xenocide, she said quietly. Complete species elimination. The word hung in the air like a curse. Xenocide, the deliberate destruction of an entire species, was the ultimate crime in Confederation law. It hadn't been attempted by any civilized race in over 1,000 years, yet these humans were doing it with the casual efficiency of exterminators. Sir, the communications officer called urgently. We're receiving a priority transmission from Admiral Rodriguez. The human admiral's image appeared on screen, the first time they had seen one of these creatures. Rodriguez looked similar to several Confederation species but was clearly adapted for high gravity. Her skin was darker than most known races, her build compact and muscular. Most unsettling were her eyes, which held the cold calculation of a predator. Admiral Kethmore, she said, we need to discuss the situation. The immediate Harbinger threat is contained, but we've discovered something troubling. What kind of discovery? Kethmore asked. These machines weren't just weapons. They were scouts. Our analysis of their data cores suggests they were preparing the way for something much larger. The screen displayed images captured from destroyed Harbinger ships. The data was fragmentary but terrifying. References to the swarm, the harvest, and coordinates pointing to areas of space beyond the galactic rim. Admiral Rodriguez, Dr. Yelhai interrupted. How were you able to analyze Harbinger technology so quickly? Our best scientists have been studying their weapons for days without success. Rodriguez's expression grew colder. Doctor, We've been fighting wars since before we discovered fire. We've learned that understanding your enemy's weapons is the first step to turning them against him." She gestured off-screen, and the image shifted to show human engineers working on captured Harbinger technology. What the Confederation observers saw made them sick. The humans weren't just studying the ancient weapons, they were reverse engineering them into even more destructive forms. "You're weaponizing their technology," Kethmore said in horror. "Of course we are," Rodriguez replied matter-of-factly. "That's what you do with enemy equipment. You figure out how it works, then you make it work better for you." Captain Zilnara shared a panicked thought pulse with her collective network. The response was immediate and unified. These humans were more dangerous than the Harbingers. "Admiral Rodriguez," Kethmore tried to keep his voice steady. "The Confederation appreciates your assistance, but we must discuss the rules of engagement. There are certain protocols regarding the treatment of defeated enemies." Rodriguez's laugh was harsh and without humor. "Admiral, let me explain something about Earth military doctrine. When something threatens innocent people, we don't capture it, study it, or negotiate with it. We kill it, completely. So it can never threaten anyone again." The transmission continued with Rodriguez explaining human strategy in detail. They had identified every Harbinger facility in this region of space and were systematically destroying them. No prisoners, no negotiations, no mercy. "What about the historical value?" Dr. Yelhai asked desperately. "These machines are ancient. They could teach us so much about early galactic civilization." "Doctor," Rodriguez replied, "we don't preserve things that want to kill us just because they're old. We studied them enough to learn how to kill them better. That's sufficient." As if to demonstrate, the screen showed human ships launching captured Harbinger vessels, now converted into massive guided bombs, at the ancient machine's primary command base. The explosion that followed was visible from 3 star systems away. "My God," whispered the warm-blood officer. "No God involved," Rodriguez corrected, apparently having heard the comment. "Just human engineering and a lot of nuclear warheads." The transmission ended with Rodriguez making a request that chilled every Confederation officer. "Admiral Kethmore, we need to schedule a meeting with your leadership. We've analyzed this region of space, and frankly, your defenses are inadequate. We need to discuss improvements." The screen went dark, leaving the Confederation command staff in stunned silence. "Sir," Captain Zilnara finally said, "what do we do?" Kethmore stared at the tactical display showing the systematic destruction of a 50,000-year-old civilization by creatures they had never known existed. "I don't know," he admitted. "I honestly don't know." Dr. Yelhai floated in her laboratory aboard the refugee ship, studying intercepted human communications with growing horror. 3 weeks had passed since the humans had arrived, and the Harbinger threat was completely eliminated. Every ancient facility had been reduced to debris, every machine destroyed, an entire species wiped from existence, but the humans weren't leaving. "Computer, play transmission log 47, she commanded. The recording began with 2 human voices discussing something they called rules of engagement, in a casual tone that made her crystalline body ring with stress harmonics. "Command, this is Colonel Martinez from the surface team. We've finished mapping the civilian population centers on Velthar Prime." "Copy that, Martinez. What's your assessment?" "Standard pattern, sir. No defensive installations, minimal military presence, civilian infrastructure spread across 12 continents, population approximately 4 billion mixed species. Threat assessment? 0, sir. These people couldn't fight their way out of a paper bag." Dr. Yelhai paused the recording. The humans had been conducting detailed military surveys of every Confederation world. They claimed it was for defensive planning, but the language they used was the same they had employed when analyzing Harbinger targets. She resumed the playback. "Sir, permission to speak freely?" "Go ahead, Martinez." "These aliens, they're not warriors at all. I've reviewed their military doctrine and it's basically advanced police work. They haven't fought a real war in centuries. Your point?" "My point is, if something like the Harbingers shows up again, these people are going to die. All of them. They have no idea how to fight for survival. The conversation continued with discussions of defensive improvements and strategic necessities. Dr. Yelhai had heard enough similar recordings to understand what was happening. The humans weren't just studying Confederation worlds, they were planning to occupy them. Computer display human fleet positions. The holographic display showed human ships stationed throughout Confederation space. They claimed to be maintaining security, but their formation surrounded every major population center and industrial facility. A soft chime announced an incoming transmission. Dr. Yelhai accepted the connection, and Admiral Kethmore's worried face appeared on screen. "Doctor, are you seeing the latest reports from the border systems? About the human colonies?" "Yes, Admiral, it's concerning." In the past 2 weeks, human civilian ships had begun arriving at previously uninhabited worlds throughout Confederation space. They claimed to be establishing forward bases for galactic defense, but what they were building looked more like military outposts than research stations. "Doctor," Kethmore continued, "I've reviewed the human requests for our historical databases. They want complete information about every species in the Confederation. Population numbers, industrial capacity, military strength, political structures, everything. Did you provide it?" "We had little choice." Admiral Rodriguez made it clear that cooperation was expected. Dr. Yelhai had met Admiral Rodriguez once during a diplomatic reception. The human woman was shorter than most species but radiated an intensity that made everyone uncomfortable. She spoke about mutual defense and shared security, but her eyes had been calculating, measuring. Computer, play transmission log 93. This recording was from a human military briefing that their translators had managed to decode. The speakers were discussing something called integration protocols. Phase 1 is complete. Harbinger, threat eliminated, local military capabilities assessed. What about Phase 2? Proceeding as planned. We have personnel embedded with all major Confederation military units as advisors. They're providing tactical training and standardizing equipment. Any resistance? None. These species are actually grateful. They think we're helping them become better defenders. In a way, we are. They'll be much more useful once they understand proper military discipline. Dr. Yelhai stopped the recording, her crystalline form dimming with despair. The humans weren't just helping. They were systematically taking control of Confederation military forces. Another chime brought a new transmission from Dr. Kethnos, who had survived the destruction of Kepler Station and was now working with the human technical teams. "Yelhai, you need to see what they're doing to our ships." The image showed a Confederation cruiser in a human shipyard. It barely looked like the same vessel. The elegant curves had been replaced with angular armor plating. The sophisticated energy weapons had been removed in favor of what the humans called kinetic systems. "They say it's for our own protection," Kethnos explained, "making our ships more effective against future threats. But they're making them more like human ships," Dr. Yelhai finished. "Exactly. And they're installing what they call communication upgrades that give human command centers direct access to all ship systems." The implications were clear. The humans were systematically replacing Confederation technology with their own, creating a dependency that would be impossible to break. "Computer, show me the latest population reports from human colonies." The numbers were staggering. What had started as small defensive outposts were growing into major settlements. Human families were arriving by the thousands, establishing permanent communities on worlds throughout Confederation space. A priority alert interrupted her analysis. Admiral Kethmore appeared on screen again, but this time his expression was one of barely controlled panic. "Doctor, we've intercepted a transmission from Earth. It's disturbing." The recording was from the human homeworld, apparently a message to Admiral Rodriguez from someone called Fleet Command. "Admiral, congratulations on the successful completion of Operation Guardian. Your handling of the Harbinger crisis has opened opportunities we hadn't expected." "Thank you, sir. The local species have been completely cooperative." "Excellent. Phase 3 is authorized. Begin full integration protocols. We need these systems secured before the next wave of colony ships arrives." Understood, sir. How many ships are we talking about? The advance fleet left Earth yesterday. 50,000 vessels carrying 20 million colonists. We're finally expanding beyond our home system in a meaningful way. Dr. Yelhai felt her core temperature drop. 20 million humans coming to Confederation space. The transmission continued. Admiral, what's your assessment of the local species? Will they accept integration? They don't have a choice, sir. They can't defend themselves, and they know it. After seeing what we did to the harbingers, they're terrified of being on the wrong side of human military power. And if they resist? There was a pause before Rodriguez answered. Sir, these species have never fought a total war. If it comes to conflict, it will be over very quickly. The recording ended, leaving Dr. Yelhai alone with the horrible truth. The humans hadn't come to save them. They had come to conquer them. The Harbinger crisis had simply provided the perfect opportunity. She thought about the distress call that had started it all. Commander Veltar's desperate plea for someone, anyone, with the power to save them. Someone had answered. But the cure was proving worse than the disease. Her communication system chimed with an incoming message from Admiral Rodriguez herself. Dr. Yelhai accepted the connection, trying to hide her fear. Dr. Yelhai, I hope you're settling in well on the refugee ship. I wanted to discuss your future. My future? We're establishing a new xenoarchaeology program. Human-directed, of course, but we need local expertise. Your work on the Harbinger sites has been impressive. The offer was polite, but Dr. Yelhai could hear the implied threat. Cooperate or be classified as a problem. Admiral, may I ask about the status of Confederation government? Rodriguez smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. The Confederation Council has voted to establish a new defensive alliance under human leadership. For their own protection, of course. Voted? Unanimously. Funny how unanimous votes become when people understand the alternatives. The transmission ended, and Dr. Yelhai was left alone with the knowledge that her civilization's independence was over. The humans had saved them from the harbingers, but only to claim them for themselves. She began recording a personal log, speaking in her native language in case human surveillance was monitoring standard Confederation communications. Personal log Dr. Yelhai, Confederation date 7.222.2387. The humans have completed their conquest of our space. They did it so smoothly that most of our people still think they're our saviors. Maybe they are. Maybe being ruled by humans is better than being extinct. She paused, looking out at the stars that no longer belonged to her people. I just wonder what happens when these new masters no longer need us. 6 months after the last Harbinger ship had been destroyed, Dr. Yelhai stood in her new laboratory aboard New Kepler Station. The facility looked nothing like the peaceful research outpost that had existed before. Massive weapon batteries covered every surface. Military checkpoints controlled access to all areas. Human soldiers patrolled corridors that once echoed with the sounds of scientific discovery. The station was safe. Perfectly, absolutely safe. It was also a prison. Dr. Yelhai, report to Conference Room Alpha immediately, announced the station's computer system in its crisp, human-programmed voice. She floated through corridors that had been redesigned according to human security protocols. Multiple blast doors could seal any section in seconds. Emergency weapons lockers were positioned every 50 meters. Everything was designed to turn the station into a fortress at a moment's notice. Conference Room Alpha had been the old diplomatic meeting space, where representatives from 7 species had once worked together as equals. Now it contained a single large table with one chair at its head, Admiral Rodriguez's chair. "Ah, Doctor, please come in," Rodriguez said without looking up from the reports spread across the table. "We need to discuss the archaeological survey of the Outer Rim systems." Dr. Yelhai settled into one of the floating supports the humans had installed for non-bipedal species. Around the table sat representatives from all the former Confederation worlds, but she noticed something troubling. None of them wore their old government uniforms anymore. Everyone wore the gray and blue of the Human Defense Alliance. "Admiral," began former Ambassador Kethril of the Ethereal Union, "our people are asking questions about the scope of these surveys. Some wonder if they're necessary for defense." Rodriguez finally looked up, her cold eyes moving from face to Furcy. Former ambassador, let me remind you of something. 6 months ago, your people were about to be exterminated by ancient machines you didn't even know existed. Today, you're alive because humans answered your distress call. She stood and activated a holographic display showing the current state of what had once been Confederation space. Every system now showed human installations. These surveys are identifying potential threats, Rodriguez continued. Ancient ruins, abandoned technology, anything that could become another harbinger situation. Would you prefer we leave such things alone until they activate and start killing your families? The former Confederation representative shifted uncomfortably. Dr. Yelhai had to admit the logic was sound, even if the methods were disturbing. However, Rodriguez continued, that brings me to today's main topic. We've completed our analysis of galactic civilization, and frankly, the situation is worse than we thought. The holographic display expanded to show the entire galaxy. Red. Areas marked regions of space that the humans classified as potential threats. Unknown species beyond our current borders. Unexplored systems that could contain ancient weapons. Abandoned colonies that might hide sleeping dangers. This galaxy is a minefield of potential extinction events. Dr. Yelhai studied the display. The red areas covered nearly half the galaxy. What are you suggesting, Admiral? Asked former Council Leader Vel Nath of the Hive Collective. I'm suggesting that the current defensive structure is inadequate, Rodriguez replied bluntly. 7 species spread across thousands of light years with no real military coordination. No standardized equipment, no unified command structure. She pressed a control and the display shifted to show proposed changes. Human bases in every system. Human ships patrolling every trade route. Human advisors attached to every local government. You're talking about complete military occupation, Dr. Yelhai said quietly. I'm talking about survival, Rodriguez shot back. Doctor, you've seen what happens when this galaxy encounters something it can't handle. You sent the distress call, remember? The reminder hit like a physical blow. It was true. They had called for help, and these humans had answered. Everything that had happened since was a consequence of that desperate transmission. Admiral, former Ambassador Kethril tried again. Surely there must be a middle ground, some way to maintain security without such extensive human presence. Rodriguez's laugh was harsh. Former Ambassador, let me tell you something about middle ground. It gets you killed. Earth learned that lesson the hard way, fighting wars you people can't even imagine. She activated another display showing images from human history. Cities in ruins, populations displaced, entire regions rendered uninhabitable by conflicts. We fought each other for thousands of years before we learned to work together, Rodriguez explained. Wars that killed billions, wars that nearly destroyed our planet. We know what real warfare looks like, and we know what happens to species that aren't prepared for it. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. These humans hadn't just evolved as predators. They had been at war with themselves for millennia. But you're at peace now, Dr. Yelhai pointed out. Your species unified. Yes, we did. Do you know how? Dr. Yelhai shook her head. We conquered ourselves. The strongest human nations absorbed the weaker ones. We unified through force because voluntary cooperation wasn't enough to ensure survival. Rodriguez returned to her chair, her expression softening slightly. Look, I understand your concerns. Nobody wants to lose their independence, but independence is a luxury you can only afford when you can defend it. Right now, none of your species can defend anything. She was right, and everyone in the room knew it. The Confederation military had been completely useless against the harbingers. What exactly are you proposing? Former Council Leader Vel Nath asked. Full integration, Rodriguez said simply. Your species maintain local governance for civilian matters, but all military decisions go through human command. All defensive installations follow human designs. All ships use human weapons. And if we refuse? Rodriguez's expression grew cold again. Then you refuse protection. And the next time something like the Harbingers appears, and it will appear, you face it alone. Dr. Yelhai felt a chill run through her crystalline structure. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. There's something else, Rodriguez continued. Our analysis indicates that human military doctrine is the only thing in this galaxy capable of handling unknown threats. We've proven that with the harbingers. But doctrine requires training, and training requires time. She activated a final display showing human military academies being constructed throughout former Confederation space. We're establishing training programs for your young people. They'll learn proper military tactics, weapons handling, and strategic thinking. It's for their own protection and yours. Former Ambassador Kethril leaned forward. You're talking about training our children to think like humans. I'm talking about training them to survive, Rodriguez corrected. Because thinking like us is what kept the human species alive when everything else tried to kill us. The meeting continued for 2 hours, but the outcome was never in doubt. One by one, the former Confederation leaders agreed to the human proposals. They had no choice. The meeting ended. Dr. Yelhai lingered behind. Rodriguez noticed and gestured for her to stay. You have something to say, Doctor? Admiral, may I ask you something directly? Go ahead. Do you see us as allies or as subjects? Rodriguez considered the question carefully. Doctor, I see you as people we're keeping alive. Whether that makes you allies or subjects depends on how you choose to respond to that reality. And if we had never sent that distress call? Rodriguez's smile was cold and honest. Then eventually something else would have killed you all, and we would never have known you existed. Dr. Yelhai left the meeting and returned to her quarters, where she continued the personal log she had been keeping since the humans arrived. Personal log Dr. Yelhai, Human Alliance date 2.15-22388. The integration is complete. We are now officially part of something called the Terran Galactic Alliance. Our children will be raised as human soldiers. Our worlds will be defended by human weapons. Our future will be decided by human leaders. She paused, looking out her window at the human patrol ships that now filled the space around New Kepler Station. I realize now what we truly summoned that day 6 months ago. We sent out a distress call when monsters threatened us, and different monsters answered. The question that haunts me isn't whether we made the right choice. We had no choice to make. Her reflection stared back at her from the reinforced window, surrounded by the lights of human defensive systems. The question that keeps me awake is simple. What happens to the rescued when their rescuers no longer need them? And more, terrifying still, what happens to the galaxy when these humans encounter something they can't defeat? She ended the log and settled down to sleep, protected by weapons that could destroy planets and watched over by guardians who had conquered their own world before coming to save others. The galaxy was safe. The price of that safety was everything they had once been. Outside her window, human ships patrolled the darkness between the stars, and Dr. Yelhai wondered if they were guards or guards,